Hello everyone, sorry here, and today we will do a meta talk. We are going to talk about the standard tournament which will happen, Runeterra Open, which will happen this weekend on Saturday. We're going to talk about which decks you need to watch out for, the popular decks, and different lineups you could consider or different strategies you might want to take. So standard tournament, Runeterra Open, so you follow the standard format obviously. You bring 3 decks. They can't have double same region. For example, if we brought something like a Jannanila, Bilgewater, and PNZ, you can't bring a second deck with Bilgewater and PNZ. You can bring Bilgewater and Freljord, Bilgewater and Demacia, PNZ and Noxus, but you can't bring the same combination. Champions, you only are allowed to bring a champion once in every deck. So you can't bring Nila in 3 different decks or 2 different decks, only in 1 deck. So that's pretty much the rules. You go into the tournament, you play 3 matches against your opponent or possibly 2. You have to win best of 3 basically. You have to win 2 matchups. You get to ban 1 deck from your opponent, and that deck you ban, most likely you want to ban a deck that counters your lineup. When you go to the ban phase, you have to kind of anticipate what your opponent wants to ban, and like which deck kind of crushes their lineup, and from there you kind of decide which deck you also want to ban. Or if your opponent has a deck that counters most of your lineup or 2 of your decks, just ban it basically. But yeah, that's pretty much the rules, how to approach the ban phase. But when you're building a lineup, you have basically 3 strategies. Either you pick the most popular decks, either you pick a lineup that counters the popular decks, or soft counters one of the popular or 2 popular decks. Kind of doesn't auto lose, you can beat it and you're still good into the general field. Because if you bring a lineup that directly counters one specific popular deck, like let's say Jannanila or Warden of the Tribes, you might be a bit weak into the other decks, right? So if opponent just doesn't bring this, you might be in a bit of trouble, right? Another approach is play the stuff you're comfortable on. Obviously, you want to make the least amount of mistakes when going to an open tournament, because open tournaments usually have some unpredictability. You don't know what your opponent will bring. You have to be ready to deal with them. At the same time, you also don't want to play 9 rounds and end up making a lot of mistakes that will not be good for you. Different lineups to bring. So we have Jannanila and Warden of the Tribes. Those 2 decks have been very popular on ladder, and they've been doing well in community tournaments. They've done well in lore report tournament and the ABG tournament report. And you bring a 3rd deck. Now the 3rd deck usually needs to synergize with this lineup. It needs to do well into different decks, like maybe a Jannanila if you want to go up against it. You want to do well, maybe not auto lose to aggro like Anis Samira. Nidalee, you don't really want to always ban Nidalee, so you need to do well into Nidalee. The decks you want to usually ban with this lineup is Gnar Jarvan. So a 3rd deck could be something like Vayne Aatrox, for example, could do well. Some people were bringing Ilawi Swain because it does well into Nila decks. It doesn't lose to Teemo Yumi or Teemo Ionia. You could also bring something like Jaxon. Jaxon is doing also really well, has a good matchup table, and it doesn't auto lose to Warden, and it doesn't lose to Janna deck, so that's also a consideration to bring. Heimerdinger Jace could bring it, I just don't like it right now. The stats of it are just horrendous, I think. We can check it, but I think the stats on Heimer are just not something I'm very happy with. Yeah, it doesn't really, like, it's losing to Jannanila, which is something you don't really want to ban usually. Jax, it's Gnar Jarvan is 50-50. What are other lineups you could bring? You could bring something like a triple Warden, which also saw success in a tournament. I think it got 2nd place in the lore report. Robomaster was bringing a triple Warden. You bring Gnar Jarvan 4. You bring Teemo Tristana. And you bring Renekton Sejuani. That's the lineup they were on. So the idea of this, you want to ban, potentially you ban Gnar Jarvan. You don't want to match him into the mirror, and you beat the other decks. So if you see maybe something like a Jannanila, you want to farm that deck basically. It's good. This lineup is good if you don't want to practice different decks. If you don't have the time practice other decks, or you just want to play the top Warden gameplay, this is the lineup. Triple Warden, just jam them on the board and win the games. Another deck that has been on the rise right now is Nidalee Bandle City. It has a 50-50% kind of close matchup against Jenna decks, Jenna Neela specifically, but it beats the Gnar Jarvan decks because it has the ability to set up a big unit with value of imitation. Then you go Overwhelm, and Warden decks are gonna struggle unless they have a freeze. Maybe they survive for a little while, but they're gonna struggle. Also, Quicksand helps you shut down their Overwhelm attack so they don't win the game. Nidalee has been... I've seen lineups that are targeting Warden, like hard targeting Warden. Something like a Nidalee, Zed Annie, Ionia, or Annie Samira, which one you prefer, but I think Zed Annie is more aggressive against these kind of decks. And a third deck, you bring maybe an elusive deck like Teemo Yumi. Teemo Yumi has better stats than Teemo Ionia, I think. So you could bring Teemo Yumi over Teemo Ionia. And I'm seeing more Teemo Yumi in tournaments. Let me check Teemo decks. Alright, so we have Teemo Yumi here, 57%, where Teemo Ionia has dropped a lot in play rate, but it's at 55%, so it's still holding up well. Beats the Gnar Jarvan, so these are the stuff you want to beat, right? Gnar Jarvan. This is a hard target on Gnar Jarvan, and you might be in big trouble if you don't find match into Gnar Jarvan. You might end up against something like a Vayne Aatrox or Illaoi Swain lineup. You're in big trouble because it's gonna farm your lineup. Especially the Teemo deck is gonna get farmed. But if you expect a lot of Gnar Jarvan, which has been a lot on the ladder and in community tournaments, you could beat it with this lineup. But keep in mind, opponents are also actively trying to counter Gnar Jarvan, so you might end up matching into people trying to counter that. Another strategy is countering maybe Jenna decks. Jenna decks are really popular right now, especially Jenna Neela. So stuff like Vayne Aatrox, Swain Illaoi, those two decks can be in the same lineup. I brought something to the gauntlet. I was testing it out. It did alright. I wasn't really happy too much with Swain Illaoi, but Vayne Aatrox does really well. You can also add Jenna Neela into this lineup. There are other decks like Gnar Jarvan 4 also does well into the Jenna decks. Volibear Galio does well. Illaoi Jarvan 4 does also well. Illaoi Jarvan 4, if you want to bring the warding Gnar Jarvan 4 along with Illaoi, you can just cut Jarvan 4 from Illaoi, and that's something like a Vayne that also works out. About countering Warden, I've seen some people run... so there's the Nidalee deck, there's also Senna Nasus. I'm not sure how good it is, but it is a consideration if you like that deck. Senna Nasus has... let me see. Let's see the stats, because I don't... 49%, so it's not that well on ladder, but you kind of counter the bad matchups. It's actually not beating it, but the idea of it is you should beat it. It's probably people not playing it correctly or something. It's also a really low play rate. So the idea is once they play the big Warden, you play Castigate and you destroy their whole board, right? And with Senna on the board, you can even play fast speed. You don't have to jam it immediately, right? Wait until they attack and you play Castigate, destroy their whole board. So that is a deck if you like playing a Nasus deck. It can beat the Warden decks. I'm not sure how it does into other matchups. Apparently here it's good into Jenna Samira, good against Volibear Galio. It's really close here, really close. 45, it's actually not that close, actually unfavored. But I feel like people are maybe playing it wrong. You can test it out, you have time, you can test it out, see if it's doing well or not. Another deck that actually beats Warden that I forgot to mention is another Warden. A Warden deck like Gnar Nico. Let me see if I can find it. Let's put Nico here. Gnar Nico, there it is. And it has a 50% win rate, but it beats slightly favored against the Gnar Jarvan deck. But you obviously need, you're gonna struggle against Jenna Neela a little bit. It does beat Volibear Galio, so that's really good. The idea of this deck is you want to play the subtypes. You have more subtypes, So you get more stats from Warden of the Tribes. You get more than 5 or 6, while Gnar Jarvan will get 3 or 4, right? So you get to buff up your board way more than your opponent. But it doesn't really do that well to Jan and Nila, I guess. But it beats Volibear and Galio. Heimerdinger Jace comes down to whether they find Ruination or not, or they're even running it. I don't know if most lists are running it right now. Yeah, they're running a one-off, and you can create it with the Ferrous Financier. But yeah, those are pretty much different lineups you could bring. You could go for the Vayne Aatrox plus Illaoi Swain. I was testing that out in Gauntlet. Vayne Aatrox, Illaoi Swain, and Janna Nila. And basically what this lineup wants to do is ban the Warden, play against the Janna Nila deck. You can beat them. You're okay into Nidalee. You're okay into the Teemo decks. So it's kind of better into the whole general field. And you just ban Vayne Aatrox. Jarvan Gnar, I mean. But the problem is, I haven't been happy with Swain Illaoi too much. Because it's very dependent on whether you find the Illaoi package early on. Like the idol into the voices and then into Illaoi. So if you don't find that, you're kind of in big trouble. And Swain is taking way too long to level. Instead of that, you could bring Illaoi Swain instead. Illaoi Jarvan instead, Jarvan 4. I think that might be a tiny bit better. Let me check the stats on the deck. I haven't tested it well, but I saw a lot of people finding success with it and they were hyping it up. So it could be a thing. So we have no, this is a low Volibear. Phew, okay. I was gonna be a bit disappointed with the deck. 56% on ladder. What does it beat? It beats Janna Nila. Wind Vayne is also a deck that can be okay. Simon was doing well with it. I haven't really bought the deck too much, but Simon has been doing well with it. We'll check the stats on it in a second. Loses the Gnar Jarvan. Obviously, you're gonna ban this deck. Volibear Galio, that's also another ban if opponent brings it, because I think Vayne Aatrox also loses to this. And Janna Nila. So those two decks are auto ban if you bring this lineup. Illaoi Jarvan, Vayne Aatrox, Janna Nila, right? You beat Janna Nila, Lurk, Vayne Aatrox will struggle. You beat Janna Samira and Pantheon. Akshan Pantheon is also a deck I've been seeing a lot on ladder, but stat-wise it hasn't been doing too well. You beat Annie Samira too, you farm it. Where's the Teemo decks? Teemo Caitlyn, Teemo Yumi. Also you beat Teemo Yumi. So this lineup wants to beat everything that isn't Gnar Jarvan or Volibear Gal. You also lose to, I think, Janna. No, you can beat Heimerdinger Jace. Heimerdinger Jace is actually a really close matchup. The only problem is that they can soul harvest your Illaoi. But if you have a form up, you save her. So I really prefer this deck. Whereas Swain Illaoi, if you play an Illaoi and they play soul harvest, you can't form up. She's dead, right? And then you probably lost the game. So I really prefer Illaoi Jarvan 4 here. What else do we have? What did I want to talk about just now? I saw Akshan Pantheon. I don't really have too much information on the deck, but I know it beats Nidalee. I know it beats that. It farms Nidalee. So if you and people are bringing Nidalee a lot lately, so you could bring it as a good deck against Nidalee. I don't know how it does into the Warden decks, or how it does into Janna Nila. It beats Janna Nila, Heimerdinger Jet. Okay, it loses to Gnar Jarvan. So I guess you want to ban this. I guess if you want to bring Akshan Pantheon, you want to bring it with something like the Illaoi Jarvan 4, maybe a Janna Nila, maybe a Vayne Aatrox, maybe Swain Illaoi, and you just ban this, right? And you play the game. If you like Gnar Jarvan, the Warden deck, and you also like playing Illaoi Jarvan as well, you could, for example, cut Jarvan from Illaoi and add maybe something like a Vayne, because Vayne will give you tumbles that you can play on the Illaoi and you start putting more aggression with the Ovan. So it still works out. Or you could cut Jarvan from Gnar, the Warden deck, and add a Garen instead, or a Vayne even. Vayne also works. So Vayne kind of works in both decks. It depends on which one you want to add her into. But that's also another route you could take if you want to bring the double Demacia decks. But yeah, that's pretty much all the lineups I could think of right now. There is Gwen Vayne. I just don't really like it too much. Let me check the stats on it. When Vania, it's good into the Demacia decks, but it's not doing too well into Jannanila. It's not doing too well into the Warden of the Tribes, but beats everything else, right? It beats the Anni Samira, which is you might end up seeing it. I don't think you're gonna see Lissandra Volibear. Akshan Pantheon might be something you see. Jax On also might be something popular in the open. It's doing really well. Jax On is actually very good because it doesn't auto lose to Warden. It actually puts up a good fight against Warden, like 47%. So it's not like auto losing it. It beats the Yalyu decks, beats Jannanila, beats Janna Samira, good into Akshan Pantheon, good into Nidalee. Like I have a lot of beats Anni Samira. I have a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? I have a lot of expectations toward Jackson. We're gonna see a lot of it. We're gonna see a lot of people finding success. It might be a deck I will consider bringing. It might be a deck you should consider bringing. Decks you want to ban are not even Warden. You don't even need to ban Warden. You can beat Warden. You can beat the other decks, ban the other decks like Heimerdinger, Jace, maybe a Gwen Vayne if you see it. Lurk is actually a 50-50. So it doesn't really have like hard target. The elusive decks are something you want to ban, right? So you could, for example, also bring Jax On along with the Warden, and just like other people were doing, like bring Jannanila as well, because Jannanila also has a good matchup table. But yeah, I'll stop blabbering. I think I've said everything I want to say. Good luck in the tournament. Hopefully you do well. The most important thing, bring some decks you're comfortable playing. Don't bring something you expect to do a lot of misplays on. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was useful. I will see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.